This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We're broadcasting from New York, New Jersey, and Glasgow, Scotland. As we continue our coverage of the UN Climate Summit, we turn to Brianna Fruean, a 23-year-old climate activist from Samoa. She addressed the world leaders Monday.
I don't need to remind you the reality of vulnerable communities. If you're here today, you know what climate change is doing to us. You don't need my pain or my tears to know that we're in a crisis. The real question is whether you have the political will to do the right thing, to wield the right words, and to follow it up with long overdue action. If you're looking for inspiration on this, look no further than the climate leadership of young Pacific people. We are not just victims to this crisis. We have been resilient beacons of hope. Pacific youth have rallied behind the cry, "We are not drowning, we are fighting." This is our warrior cry to the world. We are not drowning, we are fighting. This is my message from Earth to COP. I hope you remember my words today and look closely at your words as you go throughout COP, because e pala ma'a ai le pala upu. Thank you.
That's Brianna Fruean, the 23-year-old climate activist from Samoa, speaking at the UN Climate Summit Monday, member of the Pacific Climate Warriors delegation at COP26, youth representative of the Pacific Climate Warriors Council of Elders, joining us from Glasgow inside the COP Summit. Brianna, that was an incredibly powerful speech you gave yesterday, addressing your elders with youth wisdom. Can you talk about where Samoa is, the distinction between Samoa, where you live, and American Samoa, and what it is, what the climate emergency means for your island nation?
Yes. So I'm from Western Samoa, and there is the American Samoa part of our islands. And so we were split colonially. One went to America, and then one went to other colonial powers, but we gained our independence. So I'm from the independent state of Samoa, and it's a beautiful island within the South Pacific Ocean that's unfortunately feeling the impacts of climate change every day. It's in our livelihoods, it's at our front step, it's our everyday reality.
Let me ask you, Brianna, to talk about what you demand, and if you think what's being proposed at COP26 is sufficient.
For a long time, Pacific Islands have known that this is a problem. You know, it's not news to us that climate change is real. We've known it for decades because we experience it firsthand. And so our call has always been to keep fossil fuels in the ground. We need to be drastically lowering emissions and to make sure we can stay below that 1.5 threshold. And so that has always been our call to action, to end all fossil fuels, to phase out of that fossil fuel era and move towards renewable energy, as well as another call we are now asking is for climate damage to be financed. You know, there's no such thing as climate aid, it's climate debt. You know, bigger countries that make money from the fossil fuel industry, that make money from extractive industries, owe us debt because we are experiencing the consequences of their inaction.
And could you talk about what the consequences would be for Pacific Island nations like Samoa of global warming going above 1.5 degrees Celsius? What the projections are?
Yes. So the recent IPCC report, the projections are that low-lying atolls have around a decade. If so, a decade is if we're lucky at the current trajectory that we're on. And so for our smaller islands, it means the end. That is the sentence that world leaders, if we are no longer making those ambitious actions, the sentence is they're giving us the end. And so, you know, even though we're the ones who will be experiencing that first, we won't be the ones experiencing it last, because whatever happens to the Pacific will happen to the rest of the world. And so the call from the Pacific Islands is if we're able to save the islands, we're able to save the world.
And could you talk about your own development as a climate justice activist? You started at the age of 11, how you first got involved and what drove you?
Yes. So I first heard about climate change when I was 11 years old in a primary school classroom, and I remember turning to my classmates saying, we need to do something. And so we started an environmental group and started the 350 Samoa chapter in our island, and we were the youngest ever community leaders in that climate space, and I've been in the climate space ever since. But I truly believe in the power of our young people, and the thoughts that we have can be really powerful in this space.
I wanted to get your response to a remarkable UN ad that was put out last week. We're going to play that ad, Brianna. It was a dinosaur addressing the United Nations. It was released by the United Nations Development Program, showing a computer-generated dinosaur addressing the UN General Assembly. The dinosaur is voiced by Jack Black.
Listen up, people. I know a thing or two about extinction. And let me tell you, and you'd kind of think this would be obvious, going extinct is a bad thing. And driving yourselves extinct? In 70 million years, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. At least we had an asteroid. What's your excuse? You're headed for a climate disaster, and yet every year governments spend hundreds of billions of public funds on fossil fuel subsidies. Imagine if we had spent hundreds of billions per year subsidizing giant meteors. That's what you're doing right now. Think of all the other things you could do with that money. Around the world, people are living in poverty. Don't you think helping them would make more sense than, I don't know, paying for the demise of your entire species? Let me be real for a second. You've got a huge opportunity right now. As you rebuild your economies and bounce back from this pandemic, this is humanity's big chance. So here's my wild idea. Don't choose extinction. Save your species before it's too late. It's time for you humans to stop making excuses and start making changes. Thank you.
And especially for our radio listeners, that was a dinosaur addressing the UN General Assembly. Don't to confuse him with Jack Black, who voiced it. Brianna, your final comment.
Yeah, that was a powerful statement, and I think it's a real thought in our minds now that, you know, in humanity, we've made a lot of mistakes. We've had war, we've had famine, we've had a lot of instances where we've put humans in danger. Never, ever in the history of this planet have we lost a country. Have we been able to say, wow, a country just completely drowned underwater. And so if we're able to really think about the islands, think about extinction, and save our Pacific Islands, I think that can be our first step as humanity. We need to look out for each other, and everyone can't just think that this is just an issue for the Pacific. This is an issue for the rest of the world.
We thank you so much for being with us, Brianna Fruean, climate justice activist from Samoa, member of the Pacific Climate Warriors delegation at COP26, youth representative of the Pacific Climate Warriors Council of Elders, speaking to us from Glasgow. When we come back to the United States to look at Monday's Supreme Court oral arguments on the constitutionality of Texas' near-total ban on abortions. We'll speak with the legendary lawyer Kitty Colbert, who argued the landmark Supreme Court case credited with saving Roe v. Wade several decades ago. Stay with us.